Part 1. Seeing God the way Jesus sees Him. The goal of creation is to glorify God. See Psalm 86, verse 9, John 12, verse 28, and chapter 17, verse 1. God's glory is the radiant display of the divine nature. As God's life is poured into individuals and flows through individuals to other people, we individually and collectively image God. This is the goal of everything. It is the reason why anything other than God even exists. As God is the one being who exists in and of Himself, so God's love is the one reality that is an end in and of itself. We might say that the goal of every individual and of humanity in general is to dance the eternal dance of the Trinity, to participate in and glorify this unsurpassably loving fellowship. We do this by receiving and reflecting the unsurpassable love that God is. A more beautiful vision of creation is not imaginable. Gregory A. Boyd. Chapter 1. Seeing God in His glory. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. Psalm 19, verses 1-2. Since the dawn of time, the universe has been trying to make contact with us. The irony is that, while we have spent millions on projects like SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, we haven't gotten the message. Day after day, night after night, David says, the heavens have been shouting it, the earth has been showing it. Look at this. See that? Here it is. And there. Look, it's over there too. The glory of God is everywhere, and all creation has been trying to get us to see it. David was overwhelmed with it. Read through the Psalms. See him point to things in the night sky as if he were a wide-eyed boy seeing it for the first time. See Psalm 8. Hear the excitement in his voice as he compares the sunrise to a bridegroom coming out of his tent the morning after his wedding night, beaming with joy and bursting with vigor. See Psalm 19. Feel the trembling awe as he describes God's intricate stitchwork in knitting together nerves and muscles, arteries and capillaries, ligaments and tendons of the unborn. See Psalm 139. The creation was meant to overwhelm us, not with its beauty, complexity, or majesty, but with the one who is responsible for its beauty, its complexity, its majesty. Most of the time, though, we are overwhelmed with other, lesser things, lesser galaxies, lesser glories, lesser gods. Allow me to get personal for a moment and ask a question. What overwhelms you? Today, now, as you are listening to this, are you overwhelmed about life? About the life of someone you love? About your own life? How are you feeling about the explosion of technology? Do you ever wish you could just throw away your cell phone, disconnect your internet connection, and cancel your email account? Is everything changing so fast that you fear the world is passing you by? Are you overwhelmed about the staggering weight of credit card debt you are carrying? Is it taking its toll on you, on your marriage? Are you worried about your physical health? How about your mental health? Are you depressed? Are you afraid to admit you're depressed? Afraid what others will think, how they'll react? Are you kicking yourself for not saving more for retirement? Do you feel overwhelmed with the very real possibility that you'll have to work until you die? Are you worried that your brain is starting to slow down? Are you forgetting simple things like the spelling of familiar words, conversations, basic math? Are you worried that people around you are beginning to notice? Are you overwhelmed by your workload, wondering how much longer you can take the stress? Is your body beginning to tire more quickly, more easily? Do you find yourself panting after taking a flight of stairs instead of the elevator? How's your attitude? Are you anxious, afraid, angry? Are the muscles in your neck constantly tense with knots in them? Are you short with others? Are you crabby when you get home? How are you sleeping? Do you need something to help you sleep? Do you grind your teeth at night? How do you feel when you wake up? Do you dread the day ahead of you? What thoughts go through your mind when you stare at the mirror in the morning and you hardly recognize the person staring back? Are you taking more aspirin? More antacids? Are you drinking to relax? And is it taking more drinks to relax you? Are you becoming more dependent on prescription drugs? How's your blood pressure? Is your marriage falling apart? Is one of your kids breaking your heart? Is your job draining the life out of you? How do you think the Father looks at you when he sees you overwhelmed with such things? Do you picture him with a disappointed look on his face? Is he shaking his head and saying to himself, her again. I should have known. When is she ever going to get it together? Or do you picture a disgusted look? That does it. That's the last straw. I'm not bailing him out this time. Let him suffer the consequences and see if that doesn't straighten him out. Weighed down, stressed out, crushed, brokenhearted, overwhelmed? Is that you? If so, what do you think God is going to do with you? The scriptures say he draws near to the brokenhearted, to the crushed of spirit. See Psalm 34, verse 18. And why? Does he draw near to get a closer look at the mess we made of our lives? Does he draw near to give us a lecture, a rap across the knuckles, a good beating, or at least a berating? No, certainly he doesn't. Then why does he draw near? To bind up our wounds. See Psalm 147, verse 3. To clean them, to put salve on them, and to bandage them. He comes to help. I suspect he does the same with the overwhelmed. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, Jesus said, and I will give you. What? A piece of my mind? What you've got coming? A lesson you'll never forget? No, he says, I will give you rest. See Matthew 11, verse 28. And as he says it, you can almost see the kindness in his eyes, can't you? Almost hear the tenderness in his voice. How did Jesus respond to the two disciples who were overwhelmed with grief, so broken-hearted as they walked away from everything on that road to Emmaus? He drew near. Why? To help them get their bearings so they could find their way home. See Luke 24, verses 32 to 33. Why did Jesus come to people who were overwhelmed? Why did he come to the widow of Nain who had lost her only son? See Luke 7, verses 11 to 16. Why did he come to the synagogue official whose daughter had died? See Mark 5, verses 21 to 43. Why did he come to the father who was overwhelmed with the care of his epileptic son? See Matthew 17, verses 14 to 18. Why did he come to the woman overwhelmed with 7 demons tormenting her? See Mark 16, verses 9 to 10. Why does he come to any of us who are overwhelmed with the burdens of life? He comes to heal, to restore, to deliver, to resurrect, to ease our burdens, and to give us rest. If you are overwhelmed, I'm not here to add to the burdens you are carrying by loading you up with guilt. Being overwhelmed is nothing to feel guilty about. It is part of the geography of the life of faith, like the wilderness. We all end up overwhelmed at some time or another. Moses ended up there on more than one occasion. Elijah, Jeremiah, frequently. and Paul, so much so that he despaired of life, another way of saying he was suicidal. Even Jesus got overwhelmed in Gethsemane. See Matthew 26, verses 36 to 39. So how do we end up there, you and I? And how do we get out of there? To answer those questions, we're going to take a look at a man who found himself overwhelmed a number of times throughout his life, David. In Psalm 57, David has fled from Saul, and he is in hiding out in a cave. He is a long way from the palace, surrounded by enemies, outnumbered, and overwhelmed. My soul is among lions. I lie among the sons of men who are set on fire, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. Psalm 57, verse 4. Another time, another crisis, and he is overwhelmed again. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire, where there is no standing. I have come into deep waters, where the floods overflow me. I am weary with my crying. My throat is dry. My eyes fail while I wait for my God. Psalm 69, verses 1 to 3. Here it seems that David is about to give up completely. For the enemy has persecuted my soul. He has crushed my life to the ground. He has made me dwell in darkness, like those who have long been dead. Therefore, my spirit is overwhelmed within me. My heart within me is distressed. Psalm 143, verses 3 to 4. So how did David get over being overwhelmed with his circumstances? He got overwhelmed with God. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be above all the earth. Psalm 57, verse 5. Here he takes his eyes off his circumstances and onto the character of God. Hear me, O Lord, for your loving kindness is good. Turn to me according to the multitude of your tender mercies, and do not hide your face from your servant, for I am in trouble. Hear me speedily. Psalm 69, verses 16 to 17. Finally, he goes back in his memory, remembering the greatness of God. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all your works. I muse on the work of your hands. Psalm 143, verse 5. In each case, David regained his bearings. How? By looking up, by finding what had always been his North Star and focusing on it to find his way back to a place of faith. Whether he was in a disorienting wilderness, some confining cave, or surrounded by an impossible set of circumstances, David was always looking up, always getting overwhelmed by God, overwhelmed by His goodness, His greatness, His glory. It is a sobering truth, but a truth nonetheless. Either we will be overwhelmed by God, or we will be overwhelmed by everything else. In view of that, here are some options to consider. Are you currently overwhelmed by the glory of God, or overwhelmed by your finances? Overwhelmed by the glory of God, or overwhelmed by your family? Overwhelmed by the glory of God, or overwhelmed by the future? Your choice. Overwhelmed by awe, or by anxiety? A question to consider before making your choice. Do you want to spend the rest of your life worrying or worshiping? Awe is a prerequisite to worship. If we are not being filled with awe on a regular basis, we will not be overflowing with worship on a regular basis, at least not the way David worshiped, passionately. I know that some of you are thinking you've got a handle on life and are doing fine managing your own. Here's another thing you need to hear. We are all a heartbeat away from disaster, a heartache away from divorce, a heart attack away from death. A drunk driver, an affair, a piece of plaque breaking loose and clogging an artery, and life is never the same. It can happen to any of us at any time. We are all only a diagnosis away from devastation, cancer, Alzheimer's, MS. Maybe none of those things overwhelm you. Maybe it's something deeper, something no one sees or suspects. Maybe you're overwhelmed with guilt from a secret sin, overwhelmed with defeat from a destructive addiction, overwhelmed with shame from a painful past. What do you do then? Oscar Wilde, a writer who struggled a lot with life, once said, "We're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking up at the stars." David looked up when he found himself in his own gutter after stealing another man's wife, having the man killed to legalize the theft and legitimize the marriage, and then covering it all up as if nothing happened. Finally, overwhelmed by guilt, with his body wasting away, David looked up and saw 3 shining stars that helped him find his way home: the graciousness of God, the loving kindness of God, and the compassion of God. See Psalm 51, verse 1. Let's follow David's lead and look up at the stars. We'll see if we can get overwhelmed too. On a clear night in the country, with no city lights to dim the view or pollution to blur it, the human eye can see between 2,000 and 3,000 stars. Most appear the size of a grain of sand. For purposes of comparison, let's use that as a standard of measure. The grain of sand closest to us is our own sun, which is 93 million miles away. The second closest grain is Proxima Centauri, part of the Alpha Centauri system. It is 4.35 light-years away. That doesn't sound too far away until you do the math. A light-year is a measurement of time that it takes light to travel in 1 year. Since light travels at 186,000 miles per second, or 670 million miles per hour, a beam of light can travel to the sun in just 8 minutes. But to reach the next closest star, Proxima Centauri, it takes over 4 years. Now imagine this. Around the grain of sand that is our sun is a cluster of other stars. That is the Milky Way. As late as the 1920s, it was thought that the Milky Way was the entire universe. Then in 1923, Edwin Hubble photographed the Andromeda Galaxy, 2.5 light-years away. Now, the Hubble Space Telescope, launched in 1990 and orbiting 375 miles above the Earth, has been able to photograph images billions of miles away. With Hubble's discoveries and the telescope named after him, all calculations had to be revised. The Milky Way, the galaxy that looks like a wide river of stardust meandering through the night sky, is actually a spiral-shaped galaxy that is about 100,000 light-years across and 10,000 light-years wide. How many stars are in that vast expanse of space? Between 2 and 400 billion. To stay with our measure of a grain of sand representing a star, it would take a really large dump truck to hold them all. As for the universe itself, if a train of railroad cars were filled with sand that represented all the stars in the known universe, and if the railroad cars passed by you at the rate of 1 per second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would take 3 years for all the sand-filled cars to pass by. All those stars, those galaxies, those supernovas, those nebula, those cosmic wonders strewn throughout the universe like so many grains of sand. God did that. What is greater? He did it with a word. See Hebrews 11, verse 3. A word that is sharper than a two-edged sword, we are told, even to the dividing of soul and spirit, joints and marrow. See Hebrews 4, verse 12. A word so strong it can spin a galaxy, so sharp it can splice a gene. Hearing David's boyish enthusiasm about the wonder he experienced watching the night skies reminds me of the wonder I experienced as a boy growing up on the shores of the North Sea. Ever since I can remember, I've had a longing for belonging. I didn't find it in church, so I went looking for it in other places. One of the places that drew me was the sea. Our home was in Haugesund on the southwest coast of Norway. In back of our house were the mountains. In front was the sea, a great, gray expanse of water that stretched across the far reaches of my imagination. Every day from the time I was 9 until I was almost grown, the sea and its shores were my playground. My dreams, stories, and adventures were all played out against that backdrop. Staring out over that sea, a lighthouse stood as if a dutiful sailor in dress whites, standing at attention, watching out for boats in distress. At night, the vigilant sentry swept its beam over the sea, however fierce the wind, however frothy the waves. For all the years I played along those shores, its presence comforted me, as if it were watching out for me as well. In winter, I cut holes in the ice to jump in the freezing water and show off to my friends. In warmer weather, I played along its rocky shores, exploring the smaller universes of tide pools, teeming with almost otherworldly life forms. On the shoreline, I played in tunnels that had been burrowed by Polish prisoners of war whom the Germans had used as forced labor. I found helmets and spent shells, oblivious to the horrors of war or to the cruelties against its prisoners. I thought only of play, of cowboys and Indians, of hunting for treasures, of basking in the summer sun as the sea filled the air with the scent of its mysteries that mingled beneath the surface. My dad and grandfather often took me fishing in the dark, choppy waters of that sea. When the weather was violent, though, I stayed indoors, looking through binoculars as huge boats were tossed by its waves like plastic toys in kiddie pools. The view from the picture window in my living room was an ever-changing seascape, with jutting rocks and crashing waves, soft pastel sunrises and bold brushed sunsets, torrential rains, and blinding snowstorms. The sea nourished me in ways it's hard to describe. I respected it, but didn't fear it. It was this old, gray benefactor who gave so much, asking nothing in return. The gifts the sea gave me were companionship, solitude, a place where my imagination could roam, intriguing rocks and exotic shells, wraith-like limbs of driftwood, carcasses of sea creatures washed up on its shores, and horizons that called to me with promises of daring adventures and dazzling treasures. The fjord that carried the Vikings to other lands was the same fjord that carried my grandpa and father to sea in their youth. I watched while, on calm days, cruise ships and even the king's ship traveled this sea. It treated them all the same, this great equalizer. Yet another thing I learned from this sage teacher, yet another gift from the sea. In summer, we had long hours of sunshine. In winter, the days were short, with darkness coming around 4 in the afternoon. And when I woke up in the morning, it was still dark. But the darkness had its own gifts to give. On some nights, it looked as if some beneficent monarch had reached into his treasure chest and cast his wealth across an endless expanse of black velvet, a glittering array of diamonds, sapphires, and pearls. It was absolutely mesmerizing. Because of where we lived, we didn't have bright city lights dimming the view, and we didn't have pollution obscuring the view. On a cloudless, moonless night, you could see forever. The Milky Way seemed a highway through the heavens, paved with flecks of stars. Surrounded as I was by such glories, day and night, it was hard not to believe in God. It was hard not to believe wonderful things about Him. He was powerful. That was easy to see. All powerful. Who could match Him? He was wonderful, full of wonders, literally, and He was beautiful. How could one responsible for such beauty not be? He was generous, too. Even as a young boy, I realized that. So many extravagant gifts given so freely. Paul says as much in Romans. The basic reality of God is plain enough. Open your eyes and there it is. By taking a long and thoughtful look at what God has created, people have always been able to see His eternal power and the mystery of His divine being. Romans 1, verses 19 to 20. One of the great mysteries of the universe is what makes up the core of galaxies, including our own Milky Way. Astronomers discovered that a swirling mystery known as a black hole sits right in the middle of it, sucking stars into its vortex like a cosmic vacuum cleaner. A black hole is a mass so dense that its gravitational pull won't even allow light to escape from it. Recently, astronomers learned that this black hole is 27,000 light-years from Earth, with a mass that is 4 million times bigger than our Sun. The closer a star gets to that mysterious center of our galaxy, the more it is in danger of being drawn to its death. For me, this raises the question about the mystery of God's being. What is that core like, and how dangerous is it if you get too close? I learned, even as a little boy, that God is a lot of things. He is just, for example, but justice is not the core of His being. He is holy, too, but holiness is not the core of who He is. He is also almighty, but power is not the essence of who He is. Then what is? We are told by the disciple who was closest to Jesus that the core of God's being is love. See 1 John 4, verse 8b. If that is true, then love motivates everything He does, including the creation. Peter Kreeft has written as much in his book, Heaven, the Heart's Deepest Longing. The whole world is a love letter. The haunting of romantic love is the clue to the central theme of the story. It tells us the kind of story we are in. All artistry reflects the artist, and if God is love, then His world is the eternal love made visible in time. I take comfort that the center of God's being is not a black hole, but a beautiful heart. His heart doesn't take life, but gives life. His heart brims with love, spinning it out from itself, not sucking it into itself. I felt something of that love spill onto me like ocean spray whenever I was out in nature, especially when I was near the sea or under the stars. Eventually, though, I grew up, leaving Norway, our home, and that great playground by the sea. I became an adult, shedding my childlike wonder like so many outgrown clothes. I went off to college, then to seminary, where most of my time was spent reading densely written books of theology in libraries, not the elaborately illuminated manuscripts of God in nature. I thought of the sea and of the sky above it less and less. I stopped looking up, and I stopped being overwhelmed with the glory of God. I lost my sense of awe, and I forgot how to worship, really worship. After graduating with a degree in theology, I went to work in a church. I fell in love, got married, had children. Years passed. I returned to Norway with my son when he graduated. The shores of the North Sea had been his playground whenever we went to visit Farmor and Farfar, Grandma and Grandpa, when he was a child. Together we walked those same shores, stared out across that same sea, looked up at that same sky. He was swept up in the wonder of it all, the beauty and grandeur of it all. He was overwhelmed. Through him, I saw it all again through renewed eyes. He went out, rain or shine, and drank it all in. It was his dreaming place, his confidant, his partner in adventure. Watching him was like watching myself as a young boy. He showed me how fresh and amazing it all was. I had forgotten that. Seeing him overwhelmed by the same sea, the same shore, and the same sky that had overwhelmed me, I realized that he shares not only my DNA, but also the dreamy side of who I am. I look at him sometimes, and I am filled with awe, for he too is a universe that displays the glory of God, a mysterious, miraculous, majestic universe. Thinking about that brings me back to David and the awe he expressed in Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thoughts afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it all together. You have hedged me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed. And in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God! How great is the sum of them! If I should count them, they would be more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. Psalm 139, verses 1 to 18. That most worshipful psalm was written by a person in awe. Earlier, we saw David overwhelmed by the glory of God in the universe. Now we see him overwhelmed by that same glory in the uterus. So what does all that mean to you and to me in the overwhelming realities of life in the 21st century? Precisely this: the universe exists to give us life and to nurture that life. It is designed to provide for us, to protect us, and to awe us. But it is also here to teach us. One of the things it teaches us is how to see through heaven's eyes. David was a good student in that classroom, perhaps the best, and he has shown us how to see God in the macro and in the micro. In doing so, he has shown that there is nowhere we can flee to where the glory, the greatness, and the goodness of God is not present. Heaven teaches us to see the glory of God on a cosmic level and on a cellular level so that we can learn to see it on a circumstantial level, specifically in your circumstances and in mine. When we see our circumstances through heaven's eyes, they will never overwhelm us. There is no problem in our life so large that it is beyond God's control. There is no detail in our life so small that it is beyond God's concern. The listener's prayer. I am overwhelmed by you, God. How eloquently the night sky speaks of your glory. How grandly the sunlit earth showcases your art. I am overwhelmed that such a God would want me as his child. How could this be? Overwhelm me, I pray, with breathtaking awareness that the ruler of the universe is my dad. The prophet Isaiah asks, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens by the span, and calculated the dust of the earth by the measure, and weighed the mountains in a balance and the hills in a pair of scales? Isaiah 40, verse 12. And I answer, that's my dad. Again the prophet speaks. He it is who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Scarcely had they been planted, scarcely had they been sown, scarcely has their stalk taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them, and they wither, and the storm carries them away like stubble. Isaiah 40, verses 23 to 24. Again, I affirm, that's my dad. And finally, Isaiah says, lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars, the one who leads forth their host by number. Isaiah 40, verse 26. And I say, that's my dad. Thank you, Dad, that there is no problem in my life so large that it is beyond your control, and no detail in my life so small that is beyond your concern. More, God, show me more. Overwhelm me again and again and again. Teach me to see my circumstances through heaven's eyes.